and her knees were crushed, her ligaments torn apart. Yet Liza Minnelli was still forced to step onto the stage for 2 shows every single night. Inside the Las Vegas hotel rooms where, years earlier, her own mother Judy Garland had panicked and vomited from exhaustion, Liza was kept going with cocaine, Valium, hard liquor and painkillers. There was no real rest, no sympathy. To the casino operators, she was simply a voice that had to keep singing and a spectacle that had to keep the money flowing. Just minutes after swallowing another cocktail of drugs, the nearly broken performer would rush out under the blinding lights. She danced, she sang, pushing her body until her throat felt like it was tearing apart, all to satisfy tens of thousands of gamblers roaring from the crowd. But the audience wasn't only watching Liza, they were chasing the ghost of Judy Garland in every movement, every note. It was as if history was repeating itself on a body slowly collapsing night after night. What fear, or what pressure, made Liza quietly accept this fate, allowing the casinos to drag her down the very same path of self-destruction her mother had once walked? During the 1970s and 1980s, Las Vegas itself was undergoing a massive transformation. The era of mob-run casinos, where deals were sealed with handshakes and intimidation, yet performers were sometimes granted a rough kind of respect, was rapidly disappearing. In its place came the cold calculations of corporate hospitality boards and Wall Street investors. But even as the owners changed, the desert city's core philosophy remained exactly the same. The show must go on, and the performer must keep singing, no matter the cost. The core strategy was simple: extract the maximum wealth from tourists while keeping the casino's liability as low as possible. In this carefully controlled corporate environment, live entertainment became completely separated from ideas of artistic expression, emotional release, or the preservation of theatrical craft. The enormous entertainment palaces of Las Vegas, vast showrooms capable of seating thousands, fitted with advanced acoustics, heavy velvet curtains, and elaborate lighting systems, were never truly designed to honor music or dance. And instead, these multi-million-dollar theaters were operated as calculated loss leaders. Corporate executives who controlled the casino empires knowingly accepted enormous financial losses on the shows themselves. The expensive union orchestras, the massive electricity costs required to power the lighting systems, and the elaborate stage productions often far exceeded whatever revenue was generated from ticket sales. Yet none of that concerned the executives running the operation, because the real profit did not exist inside the theater at all. It waited just beyond the thick wooden doors, under the bright artificial lights of the casino floor. Liza Minnelli was never brought to the Nevada desert simply to sell tickets or entertain a polite seated audience for 90 minutes. To the executives, she was not viewed as an independent artist, but as a powerful attraction designed to draw crowds into the building, and ultimately guide them toward the gambling tables where the real money was made. In reality, she was valued, contracted, and deployed less like an artist and more like a powerful biological catalyst. The message from the hotel executives, never written but always understood, was brutally clear: pour every ounce of physical strength onto the stage. Night after night, Liza Minnelli was expected to ignite the room with an overwhelming storm of sound, movement, and raw adrenaline, performing with such intensity that the entire theater seemed to vibrate with energy. That explosion of energy had a very specific purpose. It was meant to surge through the darkened auditorium and overwhelm the nervous systems of the thousands of spectators watching from their seats. In the language of casino management, success was not measured in applause or critical praise. It was calculated through a cold financial metric known as the drop, the total volume of cash that guests exchanged for casino chips or pushed into slot machines. And once the final curtain fell, especially after the chaotic, alcohol-soaked midnight performance, the real objective began. Executives needed that enormous crowd to pour out of the theater in a state of restless excitement. Their adrenaline already surging, their dopamine levels heightened by the sheer physical spectacle they had just witnessed, the audience would spill onto the casino floor buzzing with energy. In that charged emotional state, The path from the theater doors to the gambling tables became almost inevitable. The strategy behind it all bordered on psychological warfare. A calm and satisfied audience would simply return to their hotel rooms, order room service, and fall asleep. But a crowd that had been pushed into a manic, euphoric state behaved very differently. Electrified by the performance they had just witnessed, they were far more likely to march straight toward the blackjack tables, roulette wheels, and baccarat pits, recklessly chasing the emotional rush that still pulsed through their veins. To guarantee this reaction, the physical design of every major hotel on the Las Vegas Strip was carefully engineered. The showrooms were never placed near the front entrances or hotel lobbies. Instead, they were deliberately hidden deep in the farthest corners of the property. When the show ended, thousands of overstimulated, often heavily intoxicated guests were forced to wander through an endless labyrinth of gambling pits and rows of ringing, flashing slot machines just to find their way out. Even the smallest details of the environment were designed to keep them trapped in that heightened state. The carpets featured loud, swirling geometric patterns meant to keep the eyes constantly moving and subtly disorient the mind. Clocks and windows were completely absent, erasing any sense of time passing. Meanwhile, casinos pumped cool, oxygen-rich air through the building, keeping patrons awake and alert long after their bodies would normally demand sleep. To leave the theater, the audience had no choice but to pass directly through the casino floor, bombarded by a storm of flashing lights, ringing machines, and crowded gambling pits before they could even locate an exit. In this carefully engineered system, Liza Minnelli had one clear corporate function: ignite the audience's nervous systems and send them into that sensory battlefield already charged with adrenaline. Her performance was the spark that set the entire mechanism in motion. To make sure this biological revenue engine never stopped running, the legal agreements binding performers to the casinos were constructed like iron shackles. For the corporate boards, an empty showroom was not merely a disappointing night of entertainment, it represented a dangerous disruption to the entire economic ecosystem of the casino floor. If an artist cancelled even one show because of pure exhaustion, a torn knee ligament from hours of dancing, or a throat infection that left them bleeding and unable to sing, the consequences could be severe. The casino would not simply apologize to the audience or offer sympathy to the performer. Instead, their legal teams moved immediately, armed with contracts built around a ruthless clause known as liquidated damages. Backed by seemingly endless corporate resources, casino lawyers could launch devastating multi-million-dollar lawsuits, not only demanding compensation for the cancelled performance itself, but also for the orchestra costs, the refunded tickets, and the broader financial disruption the empty stage caused to the gambling empire surrounding it. The lawsuits did not stop at the cost of a cancelled performance. Casino lawyers pushed the argument much further. They demanded compensation for the massive gambling profits they claimed would have been generated that night if the show had gone on. In their calculations, the absence of Liza Minnelli meant the baccarat tables, craps pits, and roulette wheels had been deprived of the energized crowds her performance was meant to deliver. In cold mathematical terms, they argued that by failing to appear on stage, she had effectively robbed the casino floor of its expected nightly yield. This ruthless legal strategy created a terrifying reality for performers. Illness, injury, or exhaustion no longer mattered. The constant threat of catastrophic financial penalties, federal lawsuits, and the possibility of permanent blacklisting within the entertainment industry forced artists to continue performing no matter how much pain their bodies endured. The stage lights stayed on, even when the performer standing beneath them was barely holding together. Within this system, the artist was no longer treated as an independent human being. They became the beating heart of a carefully engineered corporate revenue machine, one that was never allowed to stop. Ironically, during her peak Las Vegas residencies at legendary casinos like the Riviera and the Sahara, Minnelli earned staggering weekly salaries that broke industry records and far surpassed many of her contemporaries. The enormous sums paid to Liza Minnelli were not simply rewards for talent, they became tools of control. Casino executives used those staggering contracts as a shield, arguing that such extraordinary pay erased any further responsibility for her well-being. In their eyes, the multi-million-dollar salary functioned less like payment for a performance and more like an advance purchase of the performer herself. Her body, her stamina, and the fragile nervous system that powered every night on stage. On paper, she stood as the highest-paid female performer on the Las Vegas Strip. Yet that wealth often resembled a gilded cage. The massive paychecks were used to justify the quiet dismantling of normal labor protections. Rest days vanished, exhaustion was ignored, and basic human limits were treated as obstacles rather than realities. Still, the trap surrounding her extended far beyond strict legal contracts or the carefully engineered casino layouts. The executives understood that to push spectators from the theater straight toward the baccarat tables, they first needed to shatter them emotionally. The show had to become something more than entertainment. It had to strike a deep cultural nerve. To achieve that effect, casino bosses looked beyond Minnelli's immense talent. They searched for something darker, something buried within her past, turning their attention to the painful legacy of her childhood and the lingering shadow of the figure whose memory still haunted her. During the 1970s and 1980s, a large and extremely profitable portion of the Las Vegas audience was not simply purchasing a ticket to watch an independent artist named Liza Minnelli perform. What many of them truly believed they were buying was something far stranger, an invitation to a kind of staged resurrection. Beneath the glowing neon lights of the Strip, they came hoping to glimpse the lingering spirit of her mother, Judy Garland, brought back to life through her daughter's voice, movements, and presence. A casino management quickly recognized the enormous financial potential hidden within that emotional fascination. To the corporate executives studying the crowds through spreadsheets and profit charts, grief and nostalgia were not delicate human emotions. They were marketable assets. When carefully packaged and aggressively promoted, the sorrow surrounding Garland's life and death could be transformed into an incredibly profitable spectacle. The American public had developed a dark, almost obsessive curiosity about the tragic end of Garland's life in 1969. Casino bosses understood this with chilling clarity. They knew exactly what the audience expected the moment the heavy velvet curtain lifted. And behind the scenes, they were fully prepared to shape every detail of the show. Every song, every gesture, every moment on stage, to give the crowd precisely the haunting experience they had come to see. Casino executives repeatedly and aggressively pushed Liza Minnelli to perform the emotionally devastating songs that had once defined her mother, Judy Garland. Production teams, acting under strict financial directives, carefully manipulated the stage environment to intensify this connection. Spotlights were angled with precision while large portions of the stage were dropped into harsh, high-contrast shadows, deliberately recreating the haunting visual atmosphere associated with Garland's legendary yet tragic Carnegie Hall performances. The manipulation extended deep into the musical structure of the show. Orchestral arrangements were deliberately adjusted by musical directors so the crescendos, crashes, and dramatic swells closely mirrored the emotional intensity of Garland's historic performances. At the same time, Liza was subtly pressured to imitate the trembling, hyper-emotional vocal vibrato that had characterized her mother's final and most agonizing years on stage. The producers were not interested in Liza's natural strength. They were chasing the fragile illusion of Judy. This pattern of emotional exploitation also spilled directly into her own film legacy. Casino executives aggressively capitalized on Minnelli's Academy Award-winning role as Sally Bowles in the film Cabaret, demanding that she repeatedly recreate the desperate, decadent energy of the Weimar-era nightclub world. Night after night, the stage was shaped to echo that same atmosphere, turning both her mother's tragedy and her own cinematic triumph into carefully engineered spectacle for the Las Vegas audience. Night after night, the production deliberately blurred the boundary between performance and reality. Liza Minnelli was not simply asked to portray characters. She was pushed to merge them with her own life. The image of the reckless, self-destructive nightclub singer was quietly fused with a real woman standing under the spotlight, and her genuine personal struggles were subtly marketed as part of the spectacle itself. When she launched into the powerful anthem, New York, New York, a song built around triumph and vocal domination, the executives demanded something far more extreme. They wanted explosive, almost uncontrollable intensity. The crowd expected to see the strain, the veins tightening in her neck, sweat flying under the lights, as if the song itself had become a test of endurance rather than a celebration of survival. In this environment, the industry effectively forced a grieving daughter to reopen her deepest emotional wounds before thousands of intoxicated strangers every night. Her personal grief became a commercial asset. The lingering shadow of her mother, Judy Garland, was transformed into a profitable narrative, with executives exploiting that intimate vulnerability as a calculated marketing strategy. What appeared on the surface to be a heartfelt tribute often functioned as something far darker, a form of psychological pressure disguised as entertainment. And through it all, Minnelli endured this relentless system largely alone, carrying the weight of the spectacle in an industry that offered her little protection. For years, the male superstars who ruled the Las Vegas stage moved through the casino world with an unspoken protective alliance. They shared the spotlight, traded verses, and controlled the rhythm of their shows with relaxed confidence. Many of them performed almost casually, chatting with the audience, holding a drink in hand, pacing their performances so effortlessly that they barely seemed to break a sweat. Liza Minnelli was given no such freedom. As a lone female headliner responsible for carrying the entire financial weight of the showroom, she faced far harsher expectations. Casino executives did not want a relaxed vocal performance. They demanded relentless motion, explosive choreography, and constant physical intensity. Simply standing at a microphone and singing was never enough. Her contract required a high-impact, adrenaline-charged spectacle that pushed her body far beyond what most performers were ever asked to endure. The physical toll of sustaining this illusion night after night was enormous. Maintaining that level of energy was not just difficult, it was biologically unsustainable. Yet the Las Vegas entertainment system of the era ran on a brutal schedule. 2 exhausting high-energy shows every single night. There were no exceptions, no pauses, and no mercy for the performer standing alone under the stage lights. Each evening followed the same punishing rhythm. First came the glamorous dinner show at 8 p.m., performed for a formally dressed crowd finishing their meals. Then, only a short time later, the atmosphere shifted completely as the midnight show erupted. Louder, wilder, and fueled by alcohol. This demanding routine stretched across 6, sometimes even 7 consecutive nights every week. In just a matter of days, Liza Minnelli could be forced to deliver up to 14 explosive high-intensity performances. The brief gap between the final breathless bow of the early show and the thunderous orchestral opening of the late performance offered her body almost no chance to recover. Her muscles never had time to cool down. The countless microscopic tears forming in her calves and thighs during the choreography could not properly heal. At the same time, her circulatory system struggled to clear the burning buildup of lactic acid flooding her bloodstream. Night after night, she was performing in a growing state of physical deficit, pushing forward while her body remained locked in deep exhaustion. And yet the choreography that made her performances so unforgettable only intensified the strain. The sharp, stylized movements, heavily shaped by her collaboration with the legendary Broadway director and choreographer Bob Fosse, created a visually stunning stage presence. But biomechanically, the style was brutally demanding. With its angular poses, sudden stops, and relentless precision, it was never designed for long-term joint protection or physical sustainability. What audiences saw as dazzling artistry often came at the cost of enormous hidden stress on the performer's body. The choreography was never designed with longevity or physical safety in mind. Its purpose was immediate visual impact, sharp movements, intense physical tension, and a provocative stage presence. Under the influence of Bob Fosse, performers were pushed into striking poses that often defied the body's natural alignment. Dancers were required to hold awkward, inward-turned knee positions that forced the femur and tibia into unnatural internal rotation while the body carried full weight through the joint. The strain did not stop there. The routines demanded constant, forceful pelvic thrusts that repeatedly compressed the lower lumbar spine and jolted the sacroiliac joint. At the same time, the upper body was locked into hunched shoulders and rigid posture. This restricted deep diaphragmatic breathing and fixed the cervical spine in a tense, unnatural position while the performer was still expected to sing with power and control. The choreography then escalated into explosive high kicks and rapid leg snaps that stretched the hamstrings to their limits. Each movement ended with the performer dropping their full body weight onto a single locked joint. Liza Minnelli executed these violent kinetic motions again and again on unforgiving theater surfaces, hard wooden stages or even concrete floors without proper spring. And all of it was performed in rigid, elevated theatrical high heels. Every step, leap, and landing sent harsh shock waves directly through her skeletal system. Day after day, the cumulative trauma became unavoidable. The predictable medical consequence of this relentless physical punishment was the gradual destruction of the meniscal cartilage in her knees, a devastating outcome built into the very mechanics of the performance itself. The natural fluid-filled shock absorbers in her joints were entirely ground away by the sheer repetitive force of the choreography. Her spinal discs became severely compressed under the repeated impact, leading to herniations, and she suffered countless agonizing micro-tears across her major ligaments. She was quite literally grinding her skeleton into dust for the applause. Furthermore, the architectural design of the specific Las Vegas stages she commanded actively exacerbated this anatomical ruin. To ensure optimal sightlines for the massive sprawling booths at the back of the room, many of these elite showrooms utilized raid stages built with a severe permanent downward slope toward the audience. Executing aggressive high-impact FSY choreography on a sharply angled incline fundamentally altered her center of gravity. It forced her to constantly fight a downward physical momentum, placing unprecedented tearing strain on her Achilles tendons and pushing the entirety of her kinetic impact directly onto her knees with every single landing. She was not just dancing. Night after night, she hurled her body against gravity, balanced on towering high heels under blinding stage lights. While the relentless choreography was already dismantling her skeletal system piece by piece, another invisible battle was raging inside her throat. In the harsh desert climate of Las Vegas, her vocal cords faced an equally punishing assault. Filling the vast space of a 2,000-seat showroom was not simply singing. It was a brutal physiological challenge that demanded far more than ordinary vocal strength. The room itself was an enemy. The sharp clinking of heavy glassware never stopped. Waves of conversation rolled through the crowd, and a powerful 30-piece orchestra thundered just feet away. To rise above that wall of sound, she had to push her voice far past the boundaries considered safe for the human body. Gentle, carefully protected vocal techniques simply weren't enough to survive the acoustic chaos surrounding her. Instead, she unleashed raw power. Her performances relied on intense chest belting and rough, raspy vocal growls designed to cut through the noise like a blade. And she did all of it while her body was already in overdrive. Her heart racing beyond 150 beats per minute as she executed demanding high-intensity choreography. Each breath dragged in the bone-dry, heavily air-conditioned desert air, turning every note into a test of endurance. What the audience heard as electrifying power was, in reality, a relentless war between her voice, her body, and the unforgiving environment of the stage. As if the brutal strain on her voice were not enough, the air she breathed on stage made the battle even more dangerous. The massive Vegas showrooms were constantly clouded with thick layers of second-hand cigarette and cigar smoke, filling the room with unfiltered toxins. For a singer, this was a nightmare environment. The delicate mucosal lining of her throat faced a relentless attack, dry desert air stripping away moisture while chemical irritants and vocal friction tore at her vocal folds. Over time, this vicious combination caused tiny internal hemorrhages to form again and again across the surface of her vocal cords. The damage did not simply heal and disappear. Continuous trauma gradually forced her body to form rigid fibrous nodules along the vocal folds, painful growths that permanently altered the very instrument she depended on to survive. But the toll of the stage extended far beyond her voice. Even the glamorous image the audience adored carried its own hidden weight, pressing down on an already exhausted body struggling to endure the nightly spectacle. The dazzling costumes she wore, crystal-studded creations designed by legendary fashion houses such as Halston, were breathtaking works of art under the lights. Yet behind their beauty, they functioned almost like armor. Many of these elaborate outfits weighed between 5 and 10 kilograms. Wrapped in these heavy garments, she stood beneath blazing industrial spotlights that drove the stage temperature well beyond 40 degrees Celsius, transforming every performance into a physical trial. With each demanding dance number, her body poured out enormous amounts of sweat, draining precious water and electrolytes. Painful muscle cramps could seize her legs without warning, sometimes striking right in the middle of a routine. But the audience was never meant to see that struggle. The casino demanded perfection, the illusion of effortless glamour and joy. So despite the burning lights, the crushing costumes, and the stabbing pain coursing through her muscles, she was bound by contract and professionalism to keep smiling brightly, as if none of it hurt at all. Behind the glittering curtain, the reality of the performance was far more chaotic and punishing than the audience could ever imagine. In the dark, cramped wings of the theater, she often had less than 60 seconds between numbers. There, in near total darkness, the soaked, heavy costumes had to be torn off her exhausted body at lightning speed. Assistants rushed around her in a frenzy, stripping away the suffocating garments, forcing another tightly fitted, bead-covered outfit onto her frame, securing the microphone pack, and then physically pushing her back toward the stage. All of it had to happen before the orchestra finished a brief 30-second musical vamp, sending her once again into the blinding wall of light. Night after night, the relentless choreography and the bone-dry desert heat pushed her body closer to collapse. The constant strain ground away at cartilage, while her vocal cords endured repeated hemorrhaging under the pressure of projecting through the roaring showroom. Slowly, inevitably, her biology began to fail. Yet the Las Vegas entertainment machine, fiercely guarding the millions of dollars tied to each night's performance, had little tolerance for human limits. When sheer determination and adrenaline were no longer enough to keep her moving, the system stepped in with a different solution. Instead of allowing proper recovery, the solution became a tightly controlled regime of pharmaceutical intervention. As the crushing daily pressure took its toll and her body began shutting down, knees locking, muscles seizing in the darkness backstage, her voice reduced to a harsh metallic whisper, the response was not rest. The vast hospitality machine surrounding the show did not slow down for hospital visits, physical therapy, or the basic biological need to recover. The show had to continue, and the machinery of Las Vegas ensured that it did. In the ruthless economy of the Las Vegas entertainment machine, a cancelled show was far more than a simple inconvenience. One dark stage meant a quiet casino floor, and a quiet casino floor meant lost millions. For the corporate executives running the operation, that kind of silence was unacceptable. So when a performer's body began to break down, the system didn't pause. Instead, the casino's own contracted doctors were sent into the underground backstage corridors, summoned not to offer rest, but to ensure that the heavy velvet curtains still rose on schedule. These physicians operated under a very different set of priorities than traditional medicine. Their loyalty was not directed toward the long-term well-being of the artist, but toward the casino's financial engine and the nightly revenue it generated. In many ways, they functioned more like pit crew mechanics in a brutal racing circuit, called in to repair the machine just enough to keep it moving. Their role was simple and uncompromising. Keep the performer's body operational through the end of the show run, using whatever short-term pharmaceutical solutions were required. The long-term consequences of those interventions were rarely part of the calculation. What mattered was immediate functionality, not future health. Gradually, this relentless medical management created something far more disturbing than simple treatment, a tightly controlled chemical cycle designed to override the body's natural limits. In time, that system began to dominate every aspect of her physical rhythm, replacing normal biological recovery with a harsh, regulated loop of stimulation, survival, and exhaustion that kept the spectacle alive night after night. By that point, the energy driving her onto the stage was no longer purely human. Her endurance had become the result of a carefully measured pharmaceutical cocktail, administered with clinical precision just minutes before the orchestra launched into its thunderous overture. In the dressing room, casino doctors prepared the performer the way a mechanic prepares a damaged machine for one more race. Thick hypodermic needles were pushed directly into her swollen knee joints, delivering powerful injections of liquid cortisone intended to silence the intense inflammation raging inside them. The effect was immediate and deceptive. The potent steroid temporarily dulled the burning pain within the synovial fluid of the joint, allowing her to bend, step, and jump once again. On the surface, it looked like a miraculous recovery. In reality, it was only a chemical mask, one that made it possible for her to perform the punishing choreography demanded night after night. Medical science, however, is clear about the hidden cost of this solution. Repeated cortisone injections inside a joint can interfere with the body's natural ability to produce collagen, the very substance that maintains the strength and structure of cartilage. By repeatedly numbing the pain and sending her back onto the stage with a compromised joint, the system was quietly accelerating the destruction inside her knees. Over time, the damage compounded. The cartilage that protected her joints began to deteriorate, setting the stage for severe degeneration. In effect, the treatment was trading tomorrow for tonight, sacrificing her long-term mobility so that she could survive one more 90-minute performance under the lights. What the audience witnessed as unstoppable energy was, in truth, a body being pushed far beyond its natural limits for the sake of keeping the show alive. Yet numbing the brutal pain in her knees was only part of the equation. The deeper problem ran through her entire body. After endless nights of punishing choreography, dehydration, and vocal strain, her cells were drowning in exhaustion. As curtain time approached, sheer biological fatigue threatened to shut everything down. In that relentless environment, another dangerous solution crept in: illicit cocaine and powerful pharmaceutical amphetamines. The habit had first taken root in the glittering manic VIP rooms of Studio 54, but inside the Las Vegas performance machine it found quiet acceptance, even silent encouragement. The handlers surrounding the production often looked the other way. In an ecosystem that demanded relentless energy and flawless spectacle, these stimulants became a brutal shortcut to survival. The chemicals surged through her bloodstream, dulling natural pain signals while forcing her exhausted nervous system to release artificial waves of dopamine and adrenaline. When she stepped back into the light, it was no longer natural stamina driving her performance. It was the explosive force of a chemically engineered surge. The physical effects were immediate and extreme. Her pupils widened under the glare of the stage lights. Her resting heart rate shot upward into dangerous rhythms, and the brain's connection to the body's warning signals began to fade. Beneath the dazzling performance, her muscles and bones continued absorbing relentless damage, but the stimulants pushed those alarms into the background. She was propelled across the stage by something closer to rocket fuel than human endurance. And even that was not the end of the system. The second phase of this frightening daily chemical cycle existed for a specific purpose: to manage the remaining physical agony that neither stimulants nor cortisone injections could fully suppress. As the show progressed and the damage accumulated under the sweltering lights, another layer of intervention waited in the shadows, ready to keep the performance alive no matter the cost to the body sustaining it. As the performance pushed deeper into the night, the brutal impact of the choreography began to fully register inside her body. Every landing, every turn in high heels sent shockwaves through joints that were already failing. Her central nervous system cried out for relief. To endure the full 90 minutes, another tool became part of the routine. Hard liquor, usually straight vodka with no ice. This was never about celebration or pleasure. On that stage, alcohol served a very different purpose. It functioned as a crude but effective anesthetic. Small, controlled drinks dulled the raw signals traveling through her frayed peripheral nerves. As a depressant to the central nervous system, the alcohol allowed her to briefly push aside the grinding pain in her deteriorating knee joints and the pressure building within her compressed spinal discs. Under the blinding lights, she continued bounding across the stage as if nothing were wrong, while inside her body a silent battle raged with every movement. The danger of this system lay in the violent contradiction it created within her physiology. Powerful stimulants like cocaine were simultaneously forcing her heart and brain into a state of extreme chemical acceleration, pushing her cardiovascular system toward dangerously elevated rhythms. At the very same time, heavy vodka intake was working in the opposite direction, slowing and numbing her nervous system, flooding her body with toxins. While she continued singing at full force, organs like the liver and kidneys struggled at their absolute limits to filter the chemical storm rushing through her bloodstream. And when the final note faded, another phase of the cycle quietly began. Long after the curtain dropped, after the last VIP guest had left the dressing room and the roar of the standing ovation finally faded, the adrenaline that had kept her moving began to collapse. It was often well past 2 or 3 in the morning. What followed was not simple rest, but the final stage of the routine. A chemically induced shutdown designed to force her exhausted body into sleep before the entire punishing cycle began again the next day. Yet even after the curtain had fallen and the theater finally grew silent, her body refused to truly shut down. The massive influx of stimulants still racing through her bloodstream kept her brain firing at a frantic pace. Physically she was shattered, muscles trembling uncontrollably from exhaustion, yet neurologically she remained in overdrive. Her eyes stayed wide open in the quiet desert night, her heart still pounding as if the orchestra were playing. The machinery of her body continued vibrating at full speed, long after the show had ended. To force that overcharged system to stop, another intervention was waiting. Her handlers would administer heavy doses of powerful sedatives, Valium and strong pharmaceutical barbiturates, designed to abruptly silence the chaos inside her nervous system. This was not a gentle path into rest. It was a calculated chemical shutdown meant to overpower the stimulant storm still raging in her brain. But what those drugs delivered was not real sleep. True restorative sleep is the only time the body can repair damaged cells, rebuild exhausted muscles, and process the strain of the day. The barbiturates denied her that essential recovery. Instead of allowing the body to heal, they forced it into a deep chemical blackout. Within minutes, the pills dragged her into an artificial state of unconsciousness, a heavily depressed, coma-like condition that slowed her breathing to dangerously low levels. She would remain in that fragile state for only a few short hours. Then the cycle began again. By late afternoon she would wake up groggy and disoriented, her body battered, severely dehydrated, and carrying the heavy fog of a chemical hangover, just in time to prepare for another punishing night under the lights. Yet recovery was never truly part of the schedule. Long before her body had any chance to heal, the entire cycle had to begin again. As the clock crept toward the 8 o'clock overture, the machinery restarted with brutal precision. The cortisone injections, the stimulants, the alcohol, the sedatives waiting at the end of the night. It was no longer a series of choices but a mechanical routine, a toxic loop that dragged her forward day after day. Escape from it seemed impossible, sealed off by an invisible but unbreakable barrier surrounding her life. Around her stood a tightly controlled circle of powerful figures who had every reason to keep the system running. Her management team, highly paid lawyers, personal assistants, and the casino executives formed an impenetrable protective wall. But the protection was not truly for her. What they guarded most fiercely were the enormous financial streams flowing from the show, the corporate profits, the extravagant salaries, and their privileged positions within the powerful Las Vegas entertainment hierarchy. Within that environment, even the smallest voice of concern could become dangerous. Anyone inside the production who dared to question the system risked immediate consequences. A musician, a wardrobe assistant, a stagehand. If they suggested medical rehabilitation, a break from the schedule, or even expressed genuine worry about her collapsing health, their fate was swift and decisive. Those individuals were removed without hesitation. They were fired on the spot, bound by legal silence, blacklisted from future productions, and escorted off casino property under heavy security. The message was unmistakable. The show would continue, the machine would keep running, and no one within its walls was allowed to interfere with the performance that kept the lights of Las Vegas burning. The extravagant lifestyle enjoyed by the vast entourage surrounding her depended on one simple condition: she had to keep performing. Their privileged access to the immense wealth of Las Vegas, the luxury penthouse suites, the endless fine dining, and their proximity to global celebrity all hinged on a single reality. She had to remain standing on that stage night after night, keeping the casino floor alive and the money flowing. Over time, this system began to resemble something far darker. The people closest to her effectively lived off the profits generated by her relentless exhaustion. By removing anyone who showed genuine concern for her well-being, they created an environment where no warning voices could survive. Musicians, assistants, technicians, anyone who dared to question the toll the schedule was taking on her health quickly disappeared from the operation. In doing so, they eliminated every path through which compassion, medical advice, or even common sense might reach her. What remained was a carefully maintained isolation. With dissent silenced and outside perspectives cut off, she was left surrounded only by those whose interests depended on the continuation of the show. Reality itself became filtered through the priorities of the production machine, leaving little space for honest concern about the toll the work was taking on her body. The betrayal ran even deeper than silent acceptance. In many ways, the system had been deliberately constructed. The very people responsible for protecting her career, her personal managers and agency representatives, individuals legally obligated to safeguard her long-term well-being, were also the ones negotiating the demanding performance agreements with casino executives. The same contracts that guaranteed enormous profits were also quietly locking her into a schedule that pushed her body further and further toward collapse. Behind closed doors, the real negotiations about her future were conducted far from the stage. In cool, air-conditioned boardrooms, executives and representatives quietly calculated percentages and profits, treating her physical limits as negotiable assets. Her cartilage, her vocal health, even the warning signs of a failing body became bargaining chips in deals for larger shares of ticket revenue and lucrative casino back-end agreements. Despite knowing her condition was deteriorating, they still signed off on punishing contracts. 14 shows a week, securing generous management commissions while pushing her deeper into exhaustion. In effect, they delivered her directly into the machinery that demanded constant performance. Yet the deepest and most lasting damage was not only physical. It grew in the lonely, underground spaces where she spent the hours between shows. The dressing rooms hidden beneath the casino floor were nothing like the glamorous backstage suites the public imagined. Many were windowless concrete chambers built beneath the clamor of the gaming halls above. Inside those rooms, the air carried a harsh mixture of medical alcohol, thick clouds of aerosol hairspray, the heat of burning stage lights, and the lingering smell of sweat from bodies pushed past their limits. There was no natural light, no fresh air, no sense of comfort, only the heavy stillness of reinforced walls and artificial lighting that never changed. The psychological shock of her daily routine became almost unbearable. One moment she stood beneath blinding spotlights, surrounded by the thunderous applause of 2,000 cheering fans. The next, she stepped back into the suffocating silence of that underground bunker. That violent contrast, from overwhelming public adoration to absolute isolation, began to erode the boundary between performance and reality, leaving her increasingly alone within the machinery that demanded she return to the stage again and again. The violent contrast between stage and isolation, intensified by the heavy narcotics flooding her system, began triggering severe psychological consequences. Day after day she slipped into episodes of clinical depersonalization, a trauma response where the mind detaches from the body and surroundings as a form of survival. In those moments she no longer felt fully present inside her own life. The person dazzling audiences under the spotlight seemed almost separate from the exhausted figure sitting alone backstage. Gradually, she began to feel less like the star of the show and more like a distant observer watching her own life unfold from somewhere far away. No injection or stimulant could silence that kind of strain. When the barbiturates eventually faded and the chemical fog lifted, she was left alone in the suffocating stillness of her windowless dressing room. Cut off from the outside world by the same entourage that claimed to protect her, she faced long stretches of quiet that felt heavier than the noise of the stage. It was during those drained, restless hours, when her body was depleted and her mind still racing, that the full psychological cost of the routine began to surface. The most difficult moments often arrived in the early morning. Around 4 or 5 o'clock, when even the neon frenzy of the Las Vegas Strip briefly slowed into an eerie calm, the chemical crash would finally hit. The artificial adrenaline and surges of dopamine that had carried her through the night suddenly dropped away from her bloodstream. In that sudden vacuum, exhaustion, confusion, and emotional emptiness rushed in all at once. In those silent hours, the boundaries of who she was, performer, public icon, private person, began to blur. The relentless cycle of stimulation, performance, and collapse left her confronting an unsettling emptiness, a moment where the applause was gone, the lights were dark, and she was left alone with the fragile pieces of an identity strained by the relentless demands of the stage. The human brain was never meant to endure the violent neurological swing created by powerful stimulants followed immediately by heavy sedatives. After hours of being forced into overdrive by cocaine and amphetamines, the sudden chemical suppression left her mind dangerously exposed. The dopamine receptors that had been flooded and overstimulated were now completely drained. In their place came a deep chemical emptiness, an acute state of anhedonia, where pleasure, excitement, and even hope seemed to vanish entirely. In the suffocating quiet of the Nevada night, that emotional vacuum quickly transformed into something darker. With the crowd gone and the lights dimmed outside the theater, her mind became an echo chamber for every hidden fear and unresolved trauma. The silence of the dressing room amplified every insecurity. Sitting alone before the harsh glow of the vanity mirror, the last traces of stage adrenaline slowly faded, replaced by a cold, creeping unease. Under the unforgiving incandescent bulbs, she began the slow ritual of removing the persona the audience had just adored. Thick layers of sweat-proof grease paint had to be dissolved with cold cream, wiped away piece by piece from a face that had spent hours frozen in a performance smile. One by one, the heavy false eyelashes were peeled away, each movement revealing more of the exhaustion beneath the makeup. As the theatrical armor disappeared, the reflection staring back at her grew sharper and more vulnerable. In the bright, shadowless light of the mirror, the angles of her face appeared hollow and tired, her cheekbones casting stark lines that told the story of another night survived. The applause was gone, the glamour washed away, and what remained was a solitary figure confronting the cost of the spectacle she had just delivered. In those silent moments of brutal chemical withdrawal, when the sequined Halston costumes, the iconic bowler hats, and the explosive stage energy had all been stripped away, the illusion finally collapsed. Sitting alone beneath the harsh glare of the dressing room mirror, she stared into the glass expecting to see herself. But what stared back at her felt disturbingly different. The hollow cheeks, the exhausted eyes, the fragile frame. What she saw reflected in the mirror looked hauntingly like the gaunt, tragic face of her mother, Judy Garland. It was not simply a fleeting resemblance created by fatigue or harsh lighting. In those chemically depleted hours, the similarity felt like a brutal confirmation of her deepest fear. With a glass of warm vodka in one hand and a plastic bottle of sedatives resting nearby, moments of chilling clarity would sometimes break through the fog surrounding her mind. In the suffocating silence of that windowless room, the terrifying symmetry of her life began to reveal itself. She could see the pattern with painful precision. The cycle she was trapped in felt eerily familiar, an inescapable, multi-generational trap repeating itself with frightening accuracy. The same relentless pressure, the same chemical routines, the same industry machinery that had once driven her mother toward destruction now seemed to be marching her down an identical path. The parallels were not poetic or symbolic. They were disturbingly exact. Decades earlier, when Judy Garland had been a young star in the 1930s and 1940s, the powerful MGM studio system had enforced a nearly identical regimen. Studio executives demanded impossible schedules, and studio doctors supplied the chemical solutions. Stimulant pep pills kept her working through 18-hour filming days, and when exhaustion finally hit, sleeping pills were used to shut her body down so the cycle could begin again the next morning. Years earlier, the powerful studio system had tightly controlled every aspect of her mother's life. Her weight, her schedule, even the smallest details of her daily routine. She had not been treated as an individual, but as a valuable studio asset whose sole purpose was to generate profit. Decades later, standing under the blazing lights of Las Vegas, the pattern seemed to repeat itself with chilling familiarity. The entertainment machine surrounding Liza Minnelli appeared to be following the same blueprint that had once consumed Judy Garland. The similarities were difficult to ignore. The same classes of powerful sedatives circulated through dressing rooms, the same relentless performance schedules pushed the body beyond its natural limits, and the same high-pressure environments demanded flawless energy night after night. Behind the glamour, the machinery of the industry continued to operate with cold efficiency, driven by executives and financial interests far removed from the physical toll carried by the performer on stage. By the late 1960s, the Las Vegas entertainment system viewed the situation through a purely commercial lens. To the casinos, the name attached to the marquee represented a powerful draw for audiences and revenue. The legacy linking mother and daughter became, in effect, a brand capable of filling showrooms and generating enormous nightly profits. In that sense, the system rarely paused to consider the personal cost behind the performance. Yet the most defining part of the story lies in the psychological weight of that realization. Recognizing the parallels with her mother's past could have pushed someone to step away entirely. For Liza Minnelli, however, the response was far more complicated. Confronting the possibility of leaving the stage carried its own terrifying uncertainty, and that fear made escape from the cycle far more difficult than it might appear from the outside. The possibility of walking away was never as simple as it seemed. If Liza Minnelli had suddenly cancelled her shows, broken the multimillion-dollar contracts, and stepped away from the Las Vegas stage to heal her battered body, another storm was waiting outside the theater doors. The tabloid culture of the 1970s and 1980s thrived on scandal and public collapse. Publications like National Enquirer and the aggressive paparazzi agencies of the era were notorious for hunting stories about the children of famous, troubled icons. Compassion rarely entered the equation. The tabloids were not interested in the biomechanics of ruined joints, vocal damage, or the pressure created by corporate contracts. What they wanted was a narrative of downfall. If she stopped performing, the headlines would not celebrate a performer protecting her health or escaping an exploitative system. Instead, the story would almost certainly be framed as failure. In that environment, the public image of Judy Garland hung heavily over every decision. The press was ready to draw the most painful comparison possible. A cancelled show or a break for medical recovery could easily be twisted into proof that the daughter was repeating the same tragic path as the mother. That fear shaped the pressure surrounding her career. A pause for rest, a hospital stay, or even a moment of vulnerability risked being sensationalized as a dramatic breakdown rather than an act of survival. And in a media landscape hungry for scandal, the story they were most eager to print was the one she feared the most: that history was repeating itself before the entire world. For the tabloid press, the story of the tragic Garland women was simply too profitable to abandon. The narrative fed headlines, fueled gossip columns, and guaranteed public attention. In that brutal media climate, the stage itself began to feel like the only protection available to Liza Minnelli. As long as she kept performing, dancing, singing, delivering electrifying shows, the narrative remained under her control. Each standing ovation, each packed showroom, felt like proof that she had not been swallowed by the same fate that had haunted the life of Judy Garland. In the harsh economy of Las Vegas entertainment, however, survival on stage came with its own unforgiving rules. The glowing marquee lights that elevated performers could also erase them overnight. The moment an act stopped generating the enormous gambling revenue that casinos depended on, the system moved on without hesitation. A name that once dominated towering neon signs could disappear almost instantly, replaced by the next performer willing to step into the spotlight. In that environment, oblivion arrived with startling speed. Years, sometimes decades, of relentless work could vanish from public memory in a single moment. The industry rarely paused for gratitude, pensions, or reflection. It simply advanced toward the next attraction capable of filling the seats and keeping the casino floor alive. For someone who had grown up within that world, the lesson had been learned early. Raised around the powerful studio culture of Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, where performers were often treated as replaceable assets, the idea of self-worth became deeply intertwined with productivity and applause. Over time, that belief settled into something far heavier: a quiet conviction that value existed only as long as the performance continued and the audience kept cheering. Over time, a painful belief began to take root deep within her sense of identity. For Liza Minnelli, existence itself seemed tied to the roar of an audience. The thunder of applause from thousands of strangers became more than appreciation. It felt like the very confirmation that she mattered. In the darkness beyond the footlights, that sound functioned almost like psychological oxygen. Without the blinding warmth of the spotlight and the validation of the crowd, she feared that her sense of purpose, and perhaps even her sense of self, might simply dissolve. At the same time, another shadow lingered constantly over her career. The legacy of Judy Garland followed her everywhere, while the tabloid press waited eagerly for any sign that history might repeat itself. Caught between the haunting memory of her mother's struggles and the relentless hunger of scandal-driven media, she found herself in a place that felt almost impossible to escape. Every decision seemed to carry the weight of public judgment. Under that immense pressure, a harsh logic slowly formed. If the same entertainment system that had once consumed her mother was now demanding everything from her as well, then the only control she believed she still possessed was how she faced it. Rather than retreat, she continued stepping into the spotlight, choosing to confront the machine on her own terms, even when it pushed her body and mind to their limits. That moment marked a profound turning point during her years performing in Las Vegas. The tension between personal survival and public expectation grew so intense that she began separating her inner world from the persona the audience adored. The electrifying stage performer and the exhausted private individual became almost like two different identities, one fueled by applause and spectacle, the other quietly carrying the weight of a life lived under relentless pressure. Beneath the stage, hidden inside the cold concrete dressing rooms, existed a reality far removed from the dazzling spectacle the audience witnessed. There, away from the applause, was an exhausted and fragile figure, physically battered, chemically dependent, and deeply afraid. Yet moments later, when the curtain rose, that reality vanished behind the radiant armor of Liza Minnelli, the global superstar. On stage she appeared unstoppable, radiating boundless energy and joy. Her famous wide smile shining toward the crowd as if nothing in the world could touch her. That smile, so often praised by critics as part of her irresistible charm, was not always a simple expression of happiness. Over time it became something closer to a carefully constructed shield. Every gesture, every burst of kinetic energy in her performances helped maintain an illusion of absolute confidence, one designed to hide the anxiety and pressure building behind the scenes. As the years passed and the physical strain accumulated, the situation grew even more complicated. The network of handlers and enablers who had once pushed drinks and pills toward her no longer needed to insist. The cycle had already taken root. The stimulants, alcohol, and sedatives had become part of the rhythm of daily life, something she now reached for herself as the demands of performance continued. Beneath that pattern lay a deeper emotional burden connected to the legacy of Judy Garland. Carrying the memory